I'd like to start the day with Shermin Voshmgir. She's director of the Cryptoeconomic Research Lab at the University of Vienna, a pioneer in and for token engineering. You have founded the blockchain hub Berlin, and most recently published a book which is available here. It's called Tokeneconomy, and we will learn more about this in your talk. Welcome, Shermin.
Hey, thank you very much. I know it's the end of an exhausting week. There's been many conferences, many evening events, too many, in fact. So I really appreciate everyone who could make it early this morning here. And thank you, Angela, for setting up this major event. It's not easy, I know that myself, to start a new brand, a new topic, and especially if it's interdisciplinary. So I'm very glad we are here today to talk about token economics. Where's my clicker? Here, right. Yeah, I have to turn this on, you know. Technology is sometimes complicated. It's not actually. So if we look at the evolution of the internet, we can see that the web brought us the information revolution. The Web 2 in the end brought us kind of the platform economy. And the Web 3 can be seen as the token economy. In my opinion, tokens are the killer app of this new Web 3. And we haven't seen the beginning of it yet. It's only just started, and people are trying to make sense around what they can do with tokens, very similar to the fact or to how people in the early 90s, when hypertext came up and allowed us to create visual websites, people all of a sudden could create websites, but they didn't know what to put on it. So it said hello world, or maybe it was kind of a link at a search engine to an accumulation of information you could find somewhere else. But for a long time, people didn't know really what to do with these websites. And we're at the very similar stage when it comes to this new token economy. So tokens, in fact, are not a new thing. I think most of you very well are aware of the fact that tokens have existed for a long time. We've had asset tokens starting with shells and any type of really vouchers, computer chip, casino chips, etc. Royalty programs can be seen as some kind of asset tokens, but also the computing world has known tokens, and cognitive psychology has used tokens, among others, for positive reinforcement techniques to incentivize some kind of behavior. And these computing tokens very often manifest as QR codes, etc. But what we can now do with blockchain tokens, we can combine asset tokens with access tokens, with kind of incentive tokens, and we can do that at very, very low transaction costs, because the kind of copyright mechanisms, the counterfeiting mechanisms that tokens need so they're not copied are usually costly, and we don't need to invest so much in making them copyright protected, because we can now use a public infrastructure like a public blockchain network to manage these tokens. So these blockchain tokens are essentially rights management tools that give me access to either something I own or something someone else owns or a collective is maybe managing. And they are very, very powerful tools. We can see that as of today, if we go on CoinMarketCap, we already have over 2,000 publicly listed tokens, but they're a very special type of tokens. They're fungible tokens that are transferable and that can be traded, but we've seen recently a very much more interesting and diverse brand of tokens that we can create. Any type of non-fungible token that might be tied to an identity, etc., etc. If we go on, for example, Etherscan, we can see that the Ethereum mainnet only has already 200,000 token contracts have been kind of deployed on the Ethereum mainnet only. So this thing is happening, but we're still in this very early stages of creating tokens and figuring out what we can do with it. So issuing a token has become very cheap and easy. But how to design this token, the engineering, the socio-economic engineering of the token is a very different question. What is the purpose of the token would be the first question. Derived from that, what should the properties of a token be? And derived from that, we can now create some business and governance models around these tokens. And if you would ask me today, very often when people talk about tokens, they talk about tokens or they classify tokens from a kind of regulatory perspective. So we hear about security tokens and utility tokens and whatnot. And I think while that is a very important aspect, this is not where we should start. We should start looking at tokens in a more generic way. What can we theoretically do with these tokens? And as we looked at token kind of business models or token systems, we can classify them into simple token systems and complex token systems. Simple token systems would represent any type of asset or access right to goods and services that we already have today, like an asset token, for example, a token that represents a piece of art, or any type of security token, or a token that represents maybe a fraction of a real estate, right? Or access rights, tokens that give me access rights to a concert, or maybe to perform operations in a network. These simple token systems require mainly legal engineering. I'm saying mainly, not only, obviously, but the main part here is how can I create these tokens so they're legally compliant? So here the legal engineering part is predominant. Now when we look at the complex token systems, for example purpose-driven tokens, here the economic engineering part becomes much more important, and this is what we will be speaking about today, mostly throughout the whole day. So what is a purpose-driven token? Bitcoin, in fact, is a purpose-driven token, and it enables us to have a completely new type of coordination tool for networks, or for steering coordinated action of people who try to achieve something. So we're moving away from the coordination mechanisms of having top-down organizations to coordinated action in a network of untrusted actors that are coordinated by the token governance rules that incentivize individual behavior towards collective action, towards a purpose of the network. And the purpose of Bitcoin is to provide a peer-to-peer payment network. And if you perform kind of security operations for the Bitcoin network, you get rewarded with the token through the block rewards. So purpose-driven tokens are, for example, state layer tokens like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., for the purpose of creating this universal state layer that allows us peer-to-peer transactions. But we could also have other types of purpose-driven tokens, like, for example, any type of social media tokens, like Steemit, tokens that get minted upon kind of contribution to the network. When you provide content to the network, you can get rewarded with a token. Attention tokens would be such an example. Some type of token curated registries, or CO2 tokens. In fact, with the city of Vienna, we're working on a prototype to incentivize people to reduce CO2 emission, and when they can prove it, they get rewarded with a token. So these purpose-driven tokens are very interesting, and I think this is what most people don't talk about when they talk about Bitcoin, is because they represent a new type of value creation. If we look at how the economy works today, our current economy predominantly incentivizes individual action towards creating private goods. And public goods are created usually by public institutions, railroads, any type of public service, healthcare, etc., is provided by trusted third parties through very often taxpayers' money. Purpose-driven tokens like Bitcoin transcend this dichotomy and kind of transcend, in a way, this concept of, which I think is antiquated, communism versus capitalism, because it incentivizes individual action towards a collective goal. And I think this is a very, very interesting area of research of creating purpose-driven networks, and we will hear more about it later this afternoon from Jamshid, who I'm very happy to collaborate with in our research. He will be joining us starting next month. So, if we look at blockchain networks, we can say that blockchain networks are complex systems. We have simple systems and complex systems, and simple systems can use reductionist tools to kind of map and plan them and organize them and steer them. Complex systems are, well, a bit more complex, and social systems tend to be complex systems, and economic systems are a subset of social systems. And therefore, I believe that blockchain networks are in fact socio-economic systems that are in specific, they're networks, multigraphs in fact, they're adaptive, they're multi-scale in time and space, they're stochastic and they're dynamic. So if you're not a math person, that might be gibberish for you, but Chris, later on this afternoon, will be going into the details of what that means. But to sum it up for the purpose of this talk, complex systems are different from simple systems that, because the system behavior cannot be easily implied from state changes induced by single network actors or maybe coordinated action of network actors. So blockchain systems are complex socioeconomic systems, but they provide us, and they're very interesting in a way because they provide us with a rich and almost real-time data set of all kind of reflecting all economic action in the network. And this is something we've never had before. And this is something that now allows us to apply new tools and techniques in steering these economies, because our analog economies of our nation states don't have this real-time data. And so the tools that we're using in macroeconomics to steer our economies, they are very often reductionist and needed to be reductionist because they didn't even have a data set to build on, right? And even if they had the data set, up until the emergence of data science, computers, the internet, and data science, we didn't even have the computational power to kind of compute everything that is happening and make sense of everything that is happening in an economy. But given the advances of data science, and given the fact that these socioeconomic systems, these blockchain networks, have this real-time data, allows us to do really cool things, and this is what we're building in our research together with our partners, Block Science, etc. So we're trying to build this new academic discipline called, and you'll hear more about it from Michael Zarkam, economic systems engineering. And here we want to combine rigorous economic methods with engineering methods to enable the steering of these complex systems and the steering, regulation, and control of these complex systems. We would like to build on the powerful consensus mechanism that kind of proof of work showed us, that we can achieve consensus in a network of untrusted actors, but maybe make this consensus mechanism that is very resilient but not flexible, more adaptive, and create complex adaptive systems, building on ideas like Elinor Ostrom, Hayek, etc., etc. So there are many researchers that have criticized the lack of tools and methodologies for steering complex systems, and I think finally we're there to do that. So what is token economics? I've had a lot of discussions this week. Is this really economic? Isn't it just economics? Well, yes and no. Obviously, token economics is a subset of economics. And as such, also an emerging field. It studies, to make this whole thing short, is basically economics, right, around the consumptions of goods and services that have been tokenized. If we look at economics, this is a slide that shows you all the schools of economics that we have. So each box is kind of a different school of economics, and each school has their own points of view, their own methods. They sometimes overlap, they sometimes agree, but very often disagree and say quite contradictory things. So there is no one thought or one school of economics. But that's not the whole picture. There is a second. We needed a second slide to show this picture, is this whole thing. Economics as such is quite a diverse discipline. And in cryptoeconomics, the economics kind of domain needs more space. And given the fact that cryptoeconomics comes more out of the computer science field, we believe that there is a lot of room to apply, to look at existing tools in economics and see which kind of models would be appropriate in building complex systems. Isn't it just economics? I don't think so, because as we're approaching the full tokenization of our economy, and the speed at which these tokens are currently being issued is, I think, a strong indicator that eventually, the timeline is unclear, but maybe rather sooner than later, all our goods and services will be tokenized. The real world goods and services and all the other digital services that we're tokenizing. And at this point, it is really unclear how such tokenization of our economy will affect the overall system dynamics of our economy, right? And this in itself is a study, requires kind of a specific studies of token economics, in our opinion. To conclude, and I think this is probably the most important slide, I would like to argue that these blockchain networks or purpose-driven systems that we are also creating with application tokens, they are mission-critical and safety-critical systems. Why? Because they come with an inbuilt economic incentive layer. So a failure of these systems might provide huge collateral damage of many actors involved. And we've seen that with the DAO. We've seen that in many protocol upgrade debates. We've seen that with the multi-sig failures of the Ethereum network. These mission-critical and safety-critical systems need completely different rigor in research and development than a website in 1992 needed, right? We're not building a search engine. It matters whether the system will fail or not, because a lot of people will lose money if it fails. So we need different approaches to building these systems, and the startup mentality of Silicon Valley of get shit done is not appropriate. And we've seen it because a lot of people over the last few years have lost money because of that. So we need to enter, as we're entering really this network economy, as we're changing this back end of the internet that comes with this thick economic layer, we need to understand that we're building these mission-critical systems, and we hopefully will see many advances in rigorous economic systems engineering, and I'm very happy to point out that Michael, Jamshid, Chris, and many others will be speaking about that later this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Shermin, for this talk.
Yep.
I think we have a couple of minutes left for Q&A.
Yes. Okay.
So any questions?
There's no question. Maybe until there is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the mic.
Yeah, two questions.
Hi, yes. Can you just touch on non-fungible tokens?
I mean, non-fungible tokens is a big world, right? By the way, I forgot to mention, I didn't finish on the last slide, that one of the first things we did out of the Research Institute is that I wrote this book, Token Economy, which is also for sale here. You can also buy it online. There is a whole chapter on NFTs, by the way. But non-fungible tokens are it really depends what you want to do. An identity token could be a non-fungible token. Any type of reward token could be a non-fungible token. For example, we're doing this use case with the city of Vienna where we want to incentivize people, if they can prove with their app that they walked or took the bike or public transport, we can see how much, based on public data, how much CO2 emission reduction happened, and for each, and then they get rewarded with tokens, right? But ideally, the city of Vienna doesn't want to make this a fungible token. There shouldn't be a market, because then it becomes money. So we're thinking of tying it to an identity. And I wasn't planning on showing this, but you will find it. I won't talk about the slide in detail. But when we design tokens, we have to ask ourselves these questions. Only one of these questions is the regulatory aspect. But everybody always focuses on the regulatory aspect. Is it a security token? Is it this token? Well, that's also important, but first you need to think about other functionalities. How do you want to design it? Apart from the fact of asking yourself, is it on the technical level, is it a protocol token or a second layer token? Rights perspective, is it a property right or an access right? Or from fungibility perspective, should it be identical, and why should it be identical? Of course, any certificate needs to be non-identical, right? Because a driver's license or my university certificate, we don't want it to be kind of, it's not identical and it shouldn't be transferable. So depending on the use case, I need to decide, is it identical, is it fungible, what's the durability, will it expire after a while like bonus miles, or is there no expiration date, what's the incentive perspective, upon which behavior is the token minted, or is it issued against some other value, what's the token flow, what's the supply, all these things. So I think, to cut a long story short, NFTs are very, very exciting, but there are a myriad of use cases, so I think it's hard to answer that, but I'll be here all day, we can talk about it, hopefully. Yeah, okay.
One second question.
My question is quite simple. If we as economists see these complex systems, don't understand the whole consequence of it, have different opinions on it and can just test it, how should in the long run normal users that don't know anything about economy trust these incentives and understand which incentives are set and how their behavior should be influenced? So.
Very interesting question. Why do I trust my Minister of Finance?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I don't understand what they're doing and why they're increasing the interest rates, etc. So we're not eradicating trust with this new technology. We still have to trust the experts who write the governance rules or who understand the technology to write kind of the smart contracts, right? That's a philosophical question. It's a valid question, but it also applies to our current economy, right?
Final question.
Yeah, I have a question. As you're from Vienna, right? Are you a pro or con Austrian school, or are you avoiding philosophical discussions and be more like an overwatcher, something like that?
Okay, so where is Michael? We're already, like we're referring, we're actually working on a research roadmap, Michael and I, which will be published in September. And we're referring to Hayek, we're referring to Wiener, cybernetics, and we're referring to Ostrom. So one of the things, the Austrian School of Economics said many things. But one thing I identify with that they said is that we have this computational problem. And what they criticized in the early 20th century was that, in fact, all these tools used by economists were reductionist and not appropriate. Unfortunately, they didn't have tools that they provided that could be used. The critique was bigger as the solution pool that they had. So I think that, but the critique was valid, and we're building on that critique because, and that spans also to Ostrom and public good theory and complexity theory. So in a way, yes, we do refer to the Austrians, especially to Hayek, and some people have been joking, New Austrian School of Economics, I don't know. All right.
Okay,
I think
thanks
we need
again,
to wrap it up.
Shermin, for your talk, and thank you for the questions. A round of applause. Shermin, we have prepared a little present. Yes. Everyone gets this nice pink t-shirt.